Russia, a country that's basically a gas station, has reached the point where gasoline in Russia is now more expensive than in Europe and even in the United States of America. And these are official figures. In addition, jet fuel in Russia has increased in price by at least 60%, and the Kremlin itself is forced to buy fuel not only from India and Kazakhstan, but today as well. Russia has also received its first batch of gasoline from Turkey, and before that it received a batch of gasoline from Morocco. And this still does not save it from the fuel crisis that has engulfed the entire country. And all this comes after successful attacks by the armed forces of Ukraine on oil refineries across Russia, which, according to Putin, did not cause any serious damage at all. Let's break down the latest news about how a country that's basically a gas station is forced to beg for gasoline all over the world. And how did it happen that Europe, for some reason, didn't freeze, while Russians are forced to pay more for gasoline than Europeans and Americans? My name is Alexey Pichi, let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and leave any comment you want. So, a country that's basically a gas station seems to have run dry. Russia has received its first tanker shipment of gasoline from Turkey. The tanker Vendrix, loaded at the Turkish port of Mersin with about 200,000 barrels of fuel, arrived at the Russian port of Primorsk on August 24th. Again, I want to point out that the vessel Vendrix and the Turkish port of Mersin are under sanctions from the European Union, the United Kingdom, Ukraine and Switzerland, because of their ties with the unwashed Russian Federation. This batch of gasoline has already become the fifth confirmed maritime delivery of gasoline to Russia since the end of July, and the first direct shipment from Turkey. Overall, maritime fuel imports to Russia have exceeded 1 million barrels of gasoline over the past month. Now, as you can imagine, Russians are buying gasoline from anyone who will sell it at any price. As previously reported, sellers are inflating prices on their gasoline because they understand that trading with Russians is risky. They could get hit with sanctions, so these risks need to be covered. And they set quite a high price for the Russians. And the Russians asked for a discount, but they were told, listen, if you don't like it, get out of here. That was India's response when the Kremlin started begging India to lower gasoline prices for them. We sold you oil at a discount. India says, listen, if you don't like it, don't buy it. We'll just sell it to Europe. We have a market for this gasoline. Just get out. So here's the price. If you want to buy at this price, fine. If you don't like it, get out. And what did the Russians do? Of course, they bought it at inflated prices. That's it. And it's known that 3 tankers with gasoline were loaded at the Indian terminal in Odinar and then transferred to other ships off the coast of Egypt. At the end of July, another batch of gasoline from Morocco arrived in Russia. Also, Russia is begging Kazakhstan to sell it more gasoline, and now Turkey has also decided to make some money off the Russians. The fuel crisis in Russia began to gain momentum in May. By July, it had spread to almost all regions. It was the result of several oil refineries shutting down after being hit by drones from Ukraine. And in order to increase fuel supplies to the domestic market, the authorities of the Russian Federation imposed a ban on the export of gasoline and diesel fuel, significantly relaxed gasoline quality standards, and began importing petroleum products. But even this is not enough to fix the situation. Officially in Russia, the cost of aviation kerosene has risen to a historic high amid ongoing Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries. The price of aviation fuel has reached almost 122,000 rubles per ton. Thus, since the beginning of this year, it has increased by 60%. Well, as you can imagine, aviation fuel is becoming more expensive as a result of reduced oil refining in Russia due to attacks on oil refineries. Since July 1st, the Russian government has banned the export of aviation kerosene from the country. The number of oil refineries in Russia that produce aviation kerosene is significantly smaller than the number of refineries that produce gasoline and diesel fuel. At the same time, it is very difficult to increase the supply of aviation fuel through imports or by lowering quality due to strict specifications. Well, because no reasonable country would allow such an aircraft to enter. I mean, the Kremlin could of course lower the quality of aviation kerosene. Like, this way you can produce more of it, refuel planes with some dirty fuel. But I'll say it again, reasonable countries will say, no, 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 don't let this flying junkyard in. No, 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 absolutely not. There is a jet fuel specification, and only with this kind of fuel can you land at our airports. Well, as you understand, Russians can put Euro 2 gasoline in their cars. Just think about it, Euro 2 standard. They started producing gasoline with the new Euro 2 standard. Reasonable people have forgotten that such a standard ever even existed. And now experts predict that until the repairs at the refineries are finished, the price of jet fuel may continue to rise. And that means that attacks on oil refineries in Russia must not be stopped under any circumstances. Russians must not be allowed to repair these facilities. At the same time, Russia, as a gas station state, has reached the point where fuel prices at government tenders in Russia have started to exceed prices in Europe. Just think about that, including in the United States. The point is that on August 7, the government of the Russian Federation temporarily cancelled the special procedure for calculating the initial price of government contracts for fuel. All publicly funded institutions were allowed to purchase fuel at real prices offered by suppliers. In other words, the Kremlin simply said, listen, figure it out yourselves. Buy it for whatever price they offer. Previously, I should know, the purchase price for fuel was calculated using a special formula, which was proposed by the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service so that institutions couldn't artificially inflate purchase prices. But now, for example, in the Urals, they said that farmers should stock up on fuel now at any price at all. Because in the fall, the situation with fuel and lubricants could get even worse. This is what the authorities are officially telling farmers. Listen, buy it. Whatever is available, buy gasoline. They set a sky-high price, but it's better to buy at that price because it will only get worse. They say there will be even less gasoline. Moreover, gasoline with a high sulfur content will flood the market, which simply destroys engines. But it is with this dirty gasoline that Putin has decided to plug the supply gap. As a result, according to Rosstat, in some regions, government institutions are ready to buy fuel at 2 to 3 times the price that it actually costs, just to get the precious gasoline. And here are some figures from Rosstat, which means these are the official numbers from the official government of the Russian Federation. In the Magadan region, the average official price for a liter of I-92 gasoline was 86.2 rubles. But in actual tenders, the price is 3 times higher. For example, in tenders, Russians were offered to buy AI-92 gasoline for 278 rubles per liter. In the Krasnoyarsk region, Rosstat indicates the average official price is 96.67 rubles per liter of diesel fuel. But that's all on paper. In reality, this is 2.5 times lower than the price listed in the August government procurements. In occupied Crimea, the average price of AI-92, according to Rosstat, was 163 rubles per liter at the beginning of August. However, the administration of Sevastopol was officially forced to buy AI-95 gasoline at 232 rubles. And the children's camp Artek purchased diesel fuel, this is official, at 225 rubles per liter. As a result, we see a situation where Russians pay more for gasoline than Europeans. The fact is that the average price for a liter of AI-95 in the European Union is about 186 rubles per liter. The cheapest gasoline is in Malta, where it's about 130 rubles, and the most expensive is in Denmark, around 237 rubles per liter. But even the highest price in the European Union is lower than the price that is currently announced in Russia. I'm sure that these unwashed Russians standing in line at the gas station, they are still sure that this winter Europe will definitely freeze without their gas and oil. Meanwhile, it turns out that they themselves are slowly freezing. Let me remind you that during this whole time, at least 24 out of 33 major Russian oil refineries have been hit by Ukrainian drone strikes. In total, almost 200 successful attacks on oil refining facilities have been recorded. And due to the damage, about 16 plants had to completely or partially stop their operations and production. Thus, almost all key enterprises were hit, including those in the European part of Russia and the south, including plants in Ryazan and Volgograd, Nizhny Novgorod region, in Moscow, in Perm, in Samara, Tuapse, and other regions. And let me remind you, as you know, sanctions don't bother Russians at all. You remember, sanctions are only beneficial. But the restoration of complex technological units, imported equipment, and specialized additives is being delayed. A number of large plants, for example the Moscow oil refinery after the summer strikes, or the enterprises in Orsk, have been idle or under repair for several months. And the repair of certain facilities is estimated by authorities and experts to take half a year or even longer. And all of this is because Russia is now cut off from the advanced Western market. And you know, it's impossible to repair such complex equipment with just a hammer and the clumsy hands of a Russian. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye everyone.